Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you by St. Luke's On-Demand Virtual Care, which allows patients to see a provider from their home using a computer or smartphone with on-demand care for common ailments such as a cough, sore throat, or a sinus issue. More information at stluke'sonline.org. Idaho Matters is taking a deep dive into the loss of farmland here in the Gem State. Are you a farmer? What challenges do you face as farmland shrinks in Idaho? We want to hear your story. Email us at idahomatters@boisestate.edu or leave us a voicemail using the Talk to Us feature in the Boise State Public Radio app. And then listen to our series on farming called Land and Legacy. Episodes available on Monday afternoons in the Idaho Matters podcast feed. From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. You're listening to Idaho Matters. A coalition of educators, parents, and community leaders are suing the state of Idaho over our state's new school voucher law. House Bill 93, signed by Governor Brad Little earlier this year, created a tax credit program allowing families to use taxpayer dollars for private education. Now, opponents of the law say it violated the Idaho Constitution, which requires the state provide a general, uniform, and thorough system of public free schools. The lawsuit, which was filed directly with the Idaho Supreme Court, argues the new law drains resources from public schools and funds a parallel system of private education that is neither accountable nor open to all students. So joining us today to talk more about this are some of the folks who filed the lawsuit. Daniel Mooney, president of the Committee to Protect and Preserve the Idaho Constitution, Cindy Wilson, the Idaho State Director of Mormon Women for Ethical Government, and Idaho parent Alexis Morgan. I want to welcome all three of you to the program today.
Hey, good to see you or hear you.
Nice to hear from all three of you as well. Daniel, let me begin the conversation.
Pleasure to be here.
Daniel, so good to have you here. And Daniel, let me begin the conversation with you. Your group is leading this lawsuit. Can you explain, just in plain terms, why you believe House Bill 93 violates the Idaho Constitution?
Yeah, so it's at its core, it's a pretty simple challenge. It's a facial constitutional challenge to HB 93. So we're asking the Idaho Supreme Court to take a look at that language you just read from Article 9, Section 1 of our state constitution, look at this bill that the legislature passed and determine whether it passes muster under that language. So it's a pretty basic argument. We think that language is quite clear, and if you look at the Constitution as a whole, the framers don't always use that many adjectives to prescribe, our government. Here they used a number of words that make it very clear that they wanted a single, thorough, uniform, free, common system of public schools for Idaho's children. This bill compromises that. It doesn't pass muster, so that's our challenge.
And Daniel, why did your coalition decide to take this issue directly to the Idaho Supreme Court?
Because it's a constitutional challenge that doesn't require fact finding by a lower court, which is really the province of lower courts like district courts, is to let's figure out what the facts are. Are there disputes between the parties? Resolve those disputes and then apply the law to those disputes and those facts. Here, we just have a constitutional provision. We have a law that is pretty clear what it's intended to do and what it does do. And the Idaho Supreme Court is the appropriate and the most speedy way for us to get that issue resolved. We have a deadline coming up of January 15th for this law to go into effect, for the tax commission to start taking applications for this voucher subsidy. And it's really important that the Idaho Supreme Court address it quickly, more quickly than a district court might do so, in order to prevent those tax dollars from starting to flow out.
Cindy, your organization has called House Bill 93 not just unconstitutional, but unjust. Can you talk about what you mean by that?
Yes, we feel that it weakens public schools. It strips resources from the majority of Idaho school children, and it really benefits only a few at the expense of everyone. And we feel like our unified public school system that serves every student, regardless of their zip code, faith, tradition, or family income, should stand stand unfettered from that.
Alexis, as a parent, what personally motivated you to decide to join in this lawsuit?
Yeah, I think for me, the overarching concept is that when laid against like the public policy lens, um, private schools have discriminatory policies. So I chatted with a lot of friends around the state. It's not just me, but I realized I have this personal experience where when those private school policies are laid right next to our public school policies, they are discriminatory. And now they have the opportunity to receive our public funds. And so it just feels wrong to me, like ethically wrong, that we would be giving our public funds to private schools that have discriminatory policies when our public schools don't do that.
Alexis, what do you see as the biggest risk, not just to your own children, but really to other Idaho children, if House Bill 93 does go into effect come January?
Well, I don't know if I would say it's the biggest risk, but I know
Mhm.
for like right now, the state underfunds programs, specifically special education, by roughly 80 to $100 million. So these funds, these taxpayer dollars through the tax credit, are going to be diverted out, and there will be less money in the general fund. So now we are going to, as a state, we will have less resources to pull from to be able to support the kids all over the state. And and ultimately what that means then is more strain on local taxpayers when the general fund is insufficient to fund public schools. And that's really ultimately going to hurt our rural communities. And I think it's so important to note that 70% of the school districts in Idaho are rural. So it's a very we're as Cindy mentioned, we're serving a very small percentage. 94% of our Idaho kids attend public schools. So this is I think a practice that's not thinking about the overall community of what Idaho schools represent.
Cindy, your organization has argued that vouchers would actually weaken public schools. And Alexis, touched on that a bit, but I'm curious to know, in your opinion, what do you think that could look like on a day-to-day basis in Idaho classrooms if this law is allowed to stand and go into effect?
I really appreciate how Alexis framed it because she's absolutely right. We have members all across the state of Idaho, and this is one of their top issues that they're concerned about as they have children in the schools. And they're concerned because they can see we can't afford to have less money going into our public schools. And when you start taking away from the general fund, which is what this does basically, is it in some situations you might have a family that's taking let's say they have four kids, they could actually be taking $20,000 out of the general fund because they don't say pay in that much. So it's not even something that they're paying in necessarily and then taking it back. They may not even be paying that in ever. They're just taking it out of our general fund. And so from that, we know that our pie that Idaho uses for that fund is only so big, and that will end up taking money away from our public school budget. And we're concerned about that, as many of our members have reached out and told us we need to do something and protect this system that is guaranteed by the Idaho Constitution, which has been in effect and governed us well for over 100 years.
So, Daniel, I do want to go back to what the Idaho Constitution says and what it requires, which is a quote, general, uniform, and thorough system of public free schools, unquote. So, talk to us again about this lawsuit in particular and how your coalition is arguing that this new voucher law really conflicts with that requirement that is literally stated in our Constitution.
Yeah, so I mean, it is essentially antithetical to all of those adjectives, right? I mean, diverting taxpayer funds to a disparate collage of private schools does not establish and maintain or even promote a general, uniform, or common system of statewide education. Imposing no meaningful requirements for academic quality or accountability is not thorough, nor can it be even described as a system at all. And subsidize that private education is fundamentally not public or free of cost to Idaho families. Private schools aren't open to all Idaho students, as Alexis said. Private schools are not accountable to the State Board of Education. Private schools have no obligation of transparency to the people of Idaho. So that it's just I think of a constitution like my 5-year-old's coloring book picture. The Constitution gives us an outline of what our government should look like and what we should support. Leaves plenty of room for creativity and inspiration. But the legislature can't just draw an entirely different picture. And that's what this bill does. Instead of making a unique color choice for Mickey's ears, they've chosen to draw an entirely new ear. And until the public decides that Mickey is now a 3-eared mouse, which would require a constitutional amendment, the legislature must focus on making those 2 ears the best they can be, rather than spending time and money on this completely new program.
So, Cindy, supporters of the voucher system argue that these vouchers will actually give parents, more educational options and without harming public schools. I'm curious about how you respond to that claim, because yes, I mean those choices are out there, but these vouchers, I believe, are $5,000 would be a $5,000 tax credit. I don't know of any private school in the state of Idaho where the tuition is only $5,000.
You are so correct. And also, we do have so much school choice within our state. It's recognized nationally for the amount of school choice we have in public school settings. I was just talking with someone here where I live in Meridian about the many choices of education you have just within this area. We have tech schools, we have the medical arts school, we have fine arts school, we have all kinds of schools within this area. And I know the same is true throughout the Treasure Valley, but I grew up in rural Idaho. I taught in rural Idaho. I know what it looks like. I'm in those schools regularly, mentoring teachers, and they just don't have they don't have other schools there, so their choice comes from what we offer from the public school system. And we have so many opportunities through IDLA. We have created some wonderful opportunities for public career readiness amongst school districts throughout our state. And to take more funds away from that would discontinue a lot of the programs that we've been able to create for our students throughout Idaho for choice.
So, Daniel, your coalition has pointed to other states where courts struck down similar programs. In fact, we can look to Nevada and Kentucky as examples. In 2022, the state Supreme Court in Kentucky struck down a state-funded tax credit system. In Nevada, the state Supreme Court overturned a similar education savings account program as well. So with that said, how do those rulings, in your opinion, strengthen your case here in Idaho? Because we should note that in some other states, even when it was overturned, the state was able to get the system re-implemented.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's persuasive authority, right? It's not binding on our Idaho Supreme Court what other courts in other states have done, but it's helpful to look at language that's like ours in our Constitution, where framers have also, enshrined this system of public education in the Constitution. And other courts have looked at that and said, yeah, you can't get around that language. Here, I think our language is abundantly clear. And we're just asking the court to, look at those other state courts and what they did, how they analyzed their language, and reach a similar result here. So it's not binding, but it's helpful to see those instances.
Cindy, this new law does provide higher credits for students with disabilities. I believe that tax credit goes up to $7,500. But your organization still believes that falls short of protecting vulnerable families. Can you talk a little bit more about your concerns, even though there is that extra tax credit money for a family with a child with a disability?
Yes, we are concerned about that, but I want to go back to our basic premise, and that is because this is violating what we believe is the rule of law. And in our
Mm.
name, Mormon Women for Ethical Government, we believe in ethics, and this is not ethical. The abstract ideals that are guardrails for protecting our freedoms and keeping government power in check are the principles of rule of law, separation of church and state, constitutional accountability. And we really have a problem with the fact that this violates the Idaho Constitution as much as anything. And I guess it also, because of how it's written, it protects students with disabilities. It protects all Idaho children. We're not talking about we're just, we're not taking care of the whole state when this happens. This House Bill 93 was not aimed at protecting all the children of Idaho, and that is very concerning to us. And we want to stand up for more ethical government.
Alexis, as I noted, the Constitution calls for a uniform public school system. And some people are calling this new voucher system a parallel school system. And supporters of this saying, parallel is the same as uniform. I'm curious, from your perspective as a parent, what is that risk of creating this parallel school system instead of keeping the entire system uniform?
Yeah, so I would say for me, as a parent, I'm looking at news across the nation. I'm looking at news in Idaho. And one of the things that I have heard from a voucher expert and also from I've seen around the nation is that two systems technically cannot be supported in this way. And if they are, their states are in major financial disarray. Check out Arizona for that example. You can look at Florida. Most recently, there was an article that came out regarding the use of dollars for vouchers and what a mess they are in financially. So ultimately, as a parent, I look at our system and I look at our state constitution and I look at decision makers in the legislature and in the governor's office. And my question genuinely is, if 94% of our Idaho kids attend public schools, why aren't we fully funding them and supporting them right where they are? This is where they are right now. And to Cindy's point earlier, Idaho is a leader in education school choice. There are a lot of incredible options. As a parent, I've utilized the private school option. We found something for my daughter at a different time in her life. All those options are incredible and available in Idaho, but I, as a parent, and so many other parents just do not believe that public funds should be going to private schools that have zero accountability, zero oversight, and are allowed to discriminate against specific religious affiliation or for disability or for academic purposes. So it is essential from my view as a parent that we support kids right where they are. And Idaho has done a good job thus far. I'm not saying it's been bad, but definitely there are room for improvement, places to improve. And this voucher system is not looking at the system in which we already live. They're now looking for an outside entity to, it's like it's kind of like this gold thing over here, the shiny new thing, instead of looking at the system that we know that has accountability that works for our kids.
You know, Cindy, there are supporters who say that this is a way for families to be able to afford private or faith-based schooling. I am going to assume, because of the organization that you are affiliated with, your faith means a lot to you. My faith means a lot to me. My children go to faith-based private schools. But for supporters who think that we should be shifting taxpayer money so that people can put their children in particular into faith-based private schools, what would you say directly to them about why you oppose it, even though, you do have a very strong faith?
That's a really good question, Gemma, and I appreciate it because my faith is very important to me as it is to our members throughout the state. We also believe in the separation of church and state. So we don't have a problem with students attending a faith-based school. This should not be done with public money. And if a family, what I have found is that most faith-based schools, if a family really wants to send their children there and cost is a factor, there are ways they can get around that. I am familiar with a lot of our faith-based schools in the area, and I know that that's a possibility. So it's not that we don't support the fact that we have public schools in our state, and we want children taught with the very best methods, with the very best experiences that work for each individual child. And I would say that's true for parents who homeschool as well. The issue is if you have public money going into those schools or into those homes, there should be accountability, there should be transparency on curriculum being taught, and some kind of oversight. And that's where this becomes unconstitutional.
Daniel, some lawmakers are. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry. Oh no, I was just going to say I think that back to your parallel schools question. I mean, or parallel systems question. I was a private school student. I have nothing against private schools. I think we all support that right to choose. But the Constitution says that the legislature shall maintain a general, uniform, and thorough system of public, free, common schools, not one or more systems. So this parallel argument, it just doesn't fly in light of the Constitution, and that's going to be, our primary argument against that in the lawsuit.
And Daniel, there are some lawmakers here in Idaho that are arguing that funding private schools actually supplements public education rather than replacing it. In your opinion, I mean, why doesn't that argument hold up legally as well? Even though I know this isn't your primary argument moving forward, but I am curious.
Well, I mean, I think we go back to the fact that the legislature is tasked with establishing and maintaining a singular system, and that system is well vetted, it's well regulated, it's constitutionally subject to the Board of Education, and regardless of whether these other schools are supplementing or creating a parallel track, that still flies in the face of that duty to establish that uniform and thorough system that's subject to public scrutiny, that's subject to public transparency, that we can all use as a touchstone for our children, to have a good starting place in this world.
Cindy, from your perspective, what are the broader community consequences if taxpayer funds end up being diverted from public schools for families to use in private schools?
Oh, goodness. I think it's so much bigger than it even seems when you first look at it. And it's all part of that Article 9 in order to maintain a republic. And that gets down to the real gist of this, that we should know what our students are learning in schools. And as a former civics educator, that is key to my heart, that we teach students about how government works, how to participate in your system. And we should have some accountability to know that young people are learning that and can participate in a healthy, democratic society and maintain the republic that we enjoy.
Alexis, what message are you as a parent hoping to send to other Idaho parents by being a part of this lawsuit and sharing your own story?
Oh, great question. I would just say that I think for me, it's that my kids matter, and so do the kids in my community, in my school community, and around my state. And that I know that other parents care about their kids in their communities. And so it's so important for us, for me, that we feel connected in this work, and that we work together for our Idaho kids, because their future deeply matters, and that we're in this together. And I don't feel like I'm only representing me, though my name is on there. I feel like I'm speaking up on behalf of so many other parents who have come forward to say, I've experienced that too. Thank you for speaking up for our Idaho kids and our public education.
Daniel, before I let all of you go, where does the lawsuit stand currently and what's next?
So we have an order from the Idaho Supreme Court essentially accepting the case on an expedited basis. That doesn't mean that the Supreme Court has decided anything yet, but they've set a very, very short briefing schedule for the state to respond to the arguments we made in our petition. And some other groups have started to intervene in the lawsuit. So there's some pending motions to intervene, where third parties would come in and express their opinions on the arguments that we've made. And the state is currently trying to basically delay the lawsuit to seek some discovery. There's some other issues going on. We're going to oppose all of those efforts because we think this is a clear facial constitutional challenge to HB 9093 based on Article 9, Section 1. We want the Supreme Court to get that issue, take it up as quickly as possible, decide it, so that this doesn't cost the state and taxpayers more money than it needs to.
Well, I want to thank all three of you so much for taking time to talk with us. We've been speaking with Daniel Mooney, president of the Committee to Protect and Preserve the Idaho Constitution, Cindy Wilson, the Idaho State Director of Mormon Women for Ethical Government, and Idaho parent Alexis Morgan. We've been talking about a lawsuit brought against the state of Idaho, arguing that our state's new school voucher system violates Idaho's Constitution. I'm Gemma Gaudette, and this is Idaho Matters.
Sources and methods, the crown jewels of the intelligence community. Shorthand for how do we know what's real? Who told us? If you have those answers, you're on the inside, and NPR wants to bring you there. From the Pentagon to the State Department to spy agencies, listen to understand what's really happening and what it means for you. Sources and Methods, the new national security podcast from NPR.